What is the difference between static method and class method? In Python, when you put a method on a class, you're actually putting a regular function there. What happens is that when you then call this method through the class instance, it magically inserts an extra parameter. So if I call d.inst method, there is an automatic transform that happens that actually turns this call into inst method d12. This is really convenient if you're used to object-oriented programming because it behaves exactly like an object-oriented method does, while it's still actually using a normal function implementation that's more akin to what you'd get in either functional programming or purely structured programming without the object-orientedness. Occasionally, you want to disable this. You'll want to say, to ignore that first parameter and just call the function with the arguments I pass. And this is what static method will do. Static method will let you define a function that doesn't have an implicit self argument. And then when you call that, it doesn't actually do the transform anymore. So I can do static method 1, 2, and that transforms into simply static method 1, 2. Exactly the same as if it was a standalone method. It just happens to be inside a class. There's no parameter inserted at the start of it based on what it was called on. The other option for this, and this is the recommended one, is class method. This is more similar to what the first one is like, where we take the first object and insert that as the first parameter, except in this case, it's a little more clever. When we do this transformation on a class method, we actually take the type of D. So this call turns into class method type D 1, 2. And what this means is that when you get into the actual function body, this parameter class is the type of the object it was called on. This can be really handy if you're using inheritance, because if you derive a class from this class D, then the derived class is going to appear as the type here, which means you can have a static method that knows what class it was called from. And there are very few cases where you would have a function on a class where you really just want to ignore that information completely. So in general, class method is recommended for when you don't want to have an instance of an object to call the functions on it. Class method's transformation is smart enough that if D is already the type and is not an instance, then it won't do this transform. It will put in the direct class that it's on. So you could also do d.class method. You could use the class here, and the transform knows that it doesn't have to get the type anymore. It will just pass in the direct class. So in this way, you get all the benefits of not having a forced use of self, but you also know the class or the subclass that was used to call your class method. So this is the recommended way of having a method that doesn't rely on an instance of D.